After nearly 4 decades, a man investigated the cold case murder of his brother. He traveled to several states. A big break led to meeting a key witness to this mystery in the Mojave. Diamond Lake, 40 miles northwest of Chicago. The Walkers are a middle-class family of 5. The oldest, Dan, loves reading and dreaming of adventure.
He was probably the late 60s, early 70s version of a James Dean.
Younger brother Doug says one of his last memories of Dan is Dan reading to him. Dan plans to build a boat and sail around the world. But his dream is cut short when Dan is murdered on a desert highway in 1974.
Most of the people in my life didn't know this happened in our life. We just didn't talk about it.
Rumors persist for decades, and after years of silence, Doug finally decides to pursue the truth.
The Vietnam War was very prevalent during that time. It was a turbulent period in American life.
Anti-war demonstrators protest U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War.
The whole personality of the country is changing during that time.
Much to his parents' dismay, Dan Walker drops out of college in 1972 and eventually leaves Illinois for California in the summer of 1974. That fall, he packs his van for a drive. Traveling a desert highway, he picks up an 18-year-old hitchhiker. They grab a bite to eat, and as it gets late, Dan pulls his Volkswagen van over to sleep. October 1st, 1974.
The hitchhiker is awakened by a shotgun blast, and the hitchhiker is frozen in the back seat, breaking out in a cold sweat, but he does his best to peek over the bench seat of the vehicle to try to figure out what's going on and who these people are, and he does get a rough description of the people who killed Dan. Out on the highway at 6:30 in the morning on an October morning, covered in blood, trying to flag down somebody to help, and nobody would stop to help.
These are the crime scene photos of the van. There isn't much to go on.
Nothing. There was no fingerprints. They did pick up some shotgun shells that were part of the evidence. Otherwise, there was no forensic evidence whatsoever.
In 2010, Doug and his wife Loretta traveled the route to get a feel for Dan's experience. In 2023, on the 49th anniversary of Dan's murder, Doug publishes his book, Daniel, My Brother. Then he gets a surprising phone call from the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office.
Did you have a relative that was murdered in the Mojave Desert in 1974? And I go, yes. What was his name? I go, Daniel Ashton Walker Jr. And they go, well, we think we know who killed your brother.
The killer? According to investigators, a serial killer who claims connections to a satanic cult and a motorcycle gang. He claims to have killed 49 people. Thomas Eugene Creech is on death row in Idaho.
Thomas Creech was kind of a drifter in the 73-74 time frame. By his own admission, he says he worked for motorcycle gangs as an enforcer, and 73 and early into 74, it appears he went on a murdering spree.
Police confirm 9 murders. In Oregon, California, Wyoming, and Colorado. He also kills a man in prison. What motivation would there be for him to confess to all these murders if he was still going to end up on death row?
He was kind of grandiose at the time, and he was very much trying to promote, he and his lawyer at the time were trying to make a little bit of money off of this, I think. And so he started admitting to murders that he didn't commit. So if you go back into his history, it appears he admitted to up to 49 murders. but most of those bodies they never found.
The sheriff's office tells Doug that Creech gave a statement detailing Dan's murder back in 1975, but that statement was misfiled.
What is it like to read that confession?
It's intense, very intense. I'd kind of visualized over the years many times what my brother's murder looked like, but not from the murderer's standpoint. Chills are literally run up and down your back, and you see the description of him talking to my brother before he actually murders my brother. So those things are pretty intense.
In 2024, 2 execution dates come and go. In February, they reportedly cannot find a vein to inject lethal drugs. In November, a judge halts the second execution to investigate possible conflict of interest between the prosecutor and a judge.
And why are you suspicious of that?
Thomas Creech is a beloved man in his prison community. The guards were all advocating for him.
In fact, Creech is married to a guard's mother. He has now retracted his confession.
You think the motivation for him to deny his previous confession is what?
He is saying, I did not kill Daniel Walker. I want to go to trial to have you prove that I killed Daniel Walker, and in that process, he can't be put on death row.
Growing up on Diamond Lake, people asked questions. Was the motive drugs, robbery, jealousy?
And they said, well, who's the hitchhiker? And they started asking me all these questions that I could not answer.
What about the hitchhiker? The sheriff's office has his name in the file.
And then they asked me, do you want to talk to him? And I said, of course. But really believing, how do you find a hitchhiker 39 years later? Okay, I figured you're never going to find this guy.
Doug and Loretta do find him in 2023. Ken Robinson is 67 years old.
And what was that meeting like?
Intense. Very intense. Ken didn't know who we were. He wanted to know who Dan was. So he was very eager to find out who this man who he believed saved his life back in 1974.
Ken says he and Dan really connected. On the night of the murder, Ken suggests Dan sleep in the back of the van.
And Dan declined, saying, I just want to sit up here and watch the sunrise. And Ken Robinson took the bedroll. Ken Robinson believes that if they hadn't switched places, Ken would be dead and Dan would be alive. When we met, he is very much aware that Dan saved his life and allowed him to have a family and grandkids, and he knows how easily their positions could have been switched.
Ken Robinson declined our offer for an interview, but Doug did record some of their earlier conversations where Ken recounts the night of the murder, October 1st, 1974.
I woke up the first shot. The second shot, I was probably
freaking out.
That's when the glass and everything blew over me in the back. What I was hiding behind was a bag, which the mounted was a bowling bag. It had my spurs and my riding gear in it, and I was holding that up to give me some kind of protection when they started to shoot.
Yeah.
And to this day, I still think Dan knows them.
You
Really?
do?
Just something tells me that he knew them. It's just the when Dan said, man, don't shoot me. It was like he was talking to somebody he knew. It's just the way he said, hey man, please don't shoot.
Doug does not think Dan knew his killers. There are still unanswered questions. Doug says some of the evidence, like shotgun shells, was destroyed by the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department.
How does that make you feel?
Angry. Why? I had asked for Dan's file, his case file, his murder file for decades, and they wouldn't give it to me because they were afraid I could corrupt the investigation. How does destroying evidence not corrupt the investigation?
But Doug is convinced it's Creech. It gets back to something Creech himself references in his statement.
If there's one thing that convinces me that Thomas Creech is Dan's murderer, in his confession, he goes, I shot the guy, and then I reached in through the sliding window and pushed over his body so I could get into his pockets. And up until that point, I didn't even know a 1957 VW van had a sliding glass window.
What do you want to see happen?
It is in our best interest that Thomas Creech stays alive, so I can ask him as many questions I can ask him that he's willing to answer. We have pretty serious evidence that this man was culpable for my brother's murder, but to this day, to this moment, he's denying that he killed my brother Dan.
Doug would like to interview Thomas Creech himself.
Do you want to say what you want to ask him?
Tom, you're never gonna be convicted for this murder. The people that killed my brother, in order to go on with life, I had to forgive them a long time ago. And I'd hope, if that person was still alive, that I could forgive them to their face. If you're not that person, we can stop talking right now.
Dan just wanted to help a stranger and watch the sunrise, and maybe someday sail around the world.
And for us, Dan's death changed our lives. My father, I don't think, ever recovered from Dan's death.
What do you think would have become of Dan?
You know, I hate to speculate, but a good-hearted person had good ideas in his life. I think he would have done something for other people. I really believe that, because my sister Debbie was going to the same college. She goes, I was trying to get to student teaching class, and Dan was trying to save the world. The truth is, Dan was a completely normal kid, teenager and young adult. He was above average as a risk taker, trading caution for experiences. Dan's extensive travel may have separated him from the crowd, but he was a regular guy. The only thing about Dan's life that was truly abnormal was how it ended.
In Idaho, where Thomas Creech is on death row, the state has now changed the primary method of execution to firing squad. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department said they would not comment on the case because they said it is still open. Again, Doug's book is called Daniel, My Brother.